Today we're making apple crumble, and I hope that you've got all your ingredients weighed out already as I have here. I'm going to start by showing you what to do first. So 1 orange. What we're going to use from the orange is the zest and the juice of it. So you can use a fine grater or a zester to take the zest off. I'm using a microplane very fine grater, and I'm going to put that in a mixing bowl. And I'm grating the orange, but I keep turning it. I'm just wanting to take off the orange part of the skin. I don't want any of that white underneath getting into it because that's bitter. All the nice oils with the flavour are just below the skin. And what I should have said is I did wash this before I started. I washed it really well to make sure there were no chemicals left on the skin. So once I've taken all the zest off it, I'm going to use the back of a knife to slide against the grater to take some off. Now I want to do the juice. So I'm going to cut the orange in half, and you can either squeeze it into there, or if you've got a juicer, a lemon squeezer, you can use it. The type of squeezer I've got is this one, which is called a reamer, and I press that into the centre of the orange and twist it round while I'm squeezing the orange against it. So I want to extract as much juice as I can. Because when I slice the apples, I'm going to coat them with this orange juice. And the acidic orange juice will help to stop or delay the enzymic browning, which is what happens when you cut the apple slices. So that's as much juice as I'm going to get from that half. And now I'm going to do the other half. I'm just squeezing it to get the last bits out, and I'm going to put the rubbish on a plate. Rather than making lots of trips to the bin, it keeps it all neat, keeps the work area tidy to keep the rubbish on the plate. If you can see any pips from the orange, you can use a spoon. I've just got a few little tiny ones I'm going to take out. What I want to do now is to slice the apples. I've washed the apples as well to make sure they're clean before I start. And for preparing these, I'm going to cut them in half. Then rest the halves down, and with the claw grip, where my hand's over the top of the apple, I'm going to cut it into quarters. I can then cut out a small V shape from the centre, and that will take the core out. And I'm going to use the knife to peel it. You can use a vegetable peeler for doing this, but I find it's quicker and less washing up to use a knife. The same applies, you might have a corer. You could use that for taking out the centre core. But just to save having to have lots of equipment and to save on washing up, I'm going to take the core out by cutting it with a knife. Now I'm going to coat them in the orange juice, which you can either leave the slices, if you like large pieces of apple, you could leave the slices as a whole slice size. If you prefer slightly smaller chunks, you can cut those slices in half. So bridge hold, so the knife is going between my fingers, so I'm not going to cut them. So I've cut the apple into slices and then in half, and I'm going to just turn that in the orange juice to coat it. And then I'm going to do all the rest of the apple in the same way. Now I've got my apples coated in the orange juice, so I'm going to add the other ingredients for the filling. So I've got 90 grams of sugar, which can be either light brown sugar or caster sugar, which is what I've used. Then I've got my 60 grams of dried fruit. I've actually got berries and cherries, which is a mixture of dried cranberries and sour cherries and dried blueberries. And a tablespoon of corn flour, and that's going to help to thicken the juices that come out of the apples, so it's not all too runny. That's stuck in the pot a little bit. And I'm adding a teaspoon of ground cinnamon, and I'm going to give that all a stir. Make sure it's all coated. Well, it smells really good with the orange and the cinnamon. Orange is something I like to add to crumble. It's quite common normally to use lemon juice instead, but I quite like the orange, particularly with the dried fruits added to it. So I'm going to tip that into an oven-proof dish. So it's raised up slightly above the height of the dish, but as it cooks, the apples will collapse down a little bit. So that's the filling. I now need to do the topping. For the topping, I'm going to tip the flour into a bowl, and I've got a pinch of salt in with that flour as well. And I'm going to cut the butter into cubes and add that to it. Now, one of the main things that we're learning today is how to rub in. And what I'm going to do for this is put my fingers in it, and then I rub my thumbs over my fingers. So that action with the fat will rub the fat into the flour. So what it's doing is it's coating the starch grains in the flour with the butter, which means that they'll then absorb less water, and it will give a nice texture to the topping. It's a similar technique for when we make short crust pastry. It's the rubbing in technique. Also, while I'm rubbing this in, I'm keeping my hands fairly high above the bowl because that helps to get some air into the mixture. So once it's mixed so that it looks like coarse breadcrumbs, I'm going to tip the oats into the bowl. So that's porridge oats, and I'm using demerara sugar. You can use ordinary sugar, but demerara gives a slight crunch to it. And now I'm going to mix this up, and I'm pressing it together a little so it starts to clump together. Right, that's all together nicely. So I'm going to crumble that over the top. You don't want it to be too thick on the top. It all depends what shape dish you've got. Whether you've got a small deep dish, you'll only have a small surface area on the top, or a big dish. But this is the amount of crumble I normally make, because if you do have too much, you can always cook what's left on a baking tray and then use it to scatter over another dessert. So I'd want to just be able to see a little bit of the apple coming through the top of this. So I have actually used all the crumble topping on this size of dish, and I've got a baking tray, and I'm going to sit this on the baking tray just in case any juices bubble out of that. They'll go onto the baking tray rather than the bottom of my oven. So now I need to put this in the oven, and it will take 35 to 45 minutes to cook. So I'm going to set the timer for 35 minutes. When you're cooking it, don't keep opening the oven door to check what it's looking like. The more times you open the oven door, the more the temperature will drop and it will get cooler, so it will take longer to cook. So give it 30 or 35 minutes before you even open the door. So when the timer goes, take it out of the oven to have a look at it. And actually I can see that this is bubbling where the juice is coming through the crumble at the edges. Is bubbling away nicely, and the topping is a nice golden colour. So that to me looks like my crumble is ready. If I wanted to, I could stick a knife in it just to check that the apples are tender, but looking at that, I think it's bubbling so much, I think the apple slices are going to be soft enough to eat. So my favourite way to serve apple crumble is to dish it up with a dollop of creme fraiche or clotted cream on the top of it. But my cameraman disagrees with me and he thinks you have to have custard on it. But whichever way you prefer to have it, I hope that you enjoy your apple crumble that you've made today.